Whenever I talk about high prices for XRP and insert whatever number you want, whether it's a $100 XRP or a $100,000 XRP, I always try to point to the exact catalysts, data that we have, and then I try to put together a timeline on how we could actually get there. Well, in today's video, we're going to actually take a closer look at the first of the two catalysts that I laid out yesterday for how we get that real supply shock for XRP. This is a provision within the Clarity Act, which, if signed into law as written, could actually force Ripple to have to complete their distribution plan of XRP, which would bring us to our second catalyst, which would be Ripple completely stopping the ongoing sales of their XRP. Now, these are the two biggest catalysts, I think, for the XRP community to pay attention to. And in today's update, I want to focus on this provision of the Clarity Act and what it would actually translate to as far as timeline of Ripple having to distribute this XRP. So we're going to break it down in today's update. You are not going to want to miss this one. If you appreciate our content, please help us out by liking this video, sharing it out far and wide, and all of our community resources are available at zachrector.com. Now, if you didn't catch yesterday's video, you should. I pointed out here that I'm watching two specific catalysts that would lead to the high-priced XRP we know is possible. So if you missed that video yesterday, you should definitely check out that one. Now, the two catalysts are one, Section 205 of the Clarity Act, which says for a blockchain to be considered mature and for an asset to be a commodity, not a security, no one entity or affiliated persons can control more than 20% of the supply. Now, the way that this is written would mean, Ripple and affiliated persons, I think this would include Brad Garlinghouse, other executives of the team, cumulatively, they would have to get their holdings below that 20 billion number. Now, I've dug into this a little bit deeper here. There's an exception for already established blockchains. And so I want to point this out, but then I also want to, people were asking about the timeline. Okay, if Ripple does have to get their holdings below 20 billion, how long will they have to do so? That's what we're going to focus on in today's update. The second catalyst is, of course, if this plays out, they complete the distribution, the sales of XRP from Ripple could completely stop. But quick note here from Eleanor Terrett, she interviewed Dusty Johnson, who said, quote, if the Senate can get this done in the next few weeks, we will move fast. So are we going to get this done by the 4th of July? Probably not, right? President Trump at the G7, busy with the Iran deal, probably not going to get this done. And first off, before President Trump can do anything, Congress has to get their act together and get the bill to his desk. But we remain hopeful. And right here, Eleanor Terrett in this interview, it sounds like, Representative Dusty Johnson is saying, if we can get this done in the next few weeks, it's going to move fast. And it presents the opportunity to get the Clarity Act done before the August recess. And that's what I'm going to run with here. So for this video, we're going to assume that the Clarity Act gets done, signed into law by August. And that's where we're going to take and run with our timeline from there. Now, first, we look at this statutory safe harbor criteria. This is Section 205C of the Clarity Act, which provides a safe harbor pathway. So, a project can establish maturity by meeting the requirements in either Paragraph 2, which is the full set of criteria for any blockchain system, or Paragraph 3, which is a lighter set for certain pre-existing blockchains created before enactment, meeting most criteria by January 1st, 2020, plus 50% distributed ownership. So this is going to be critical, and we're going to break down the difference here. So for any and all new blockchain systems to be decentralized and mature, here is the criteria from Paragraph 2. First off is system value. Token value is substantially derived from blockchain use, functioning, development, plan, if any, substantially completed. So you have a functional system, open and interoperable system, programmatic system, and the system governance. No person group has unilateral authority to material alter functionality, rules, consensus, or to direct 20% of voting power where voting can change the system. So let's stop right there. On the XRP ledger, Ripple only runs one validator of the 35 that are on our DUNL list. Our default unique node list is what that stands for. And so we basically have 35 validators that determine consensus and voting for amendments on the XRP ledger. Ripple only runs one, so far below the 20% control of the network. So we would pass there easily. And we also need an impartial system, no unique privileges or permissions, okay? And then we need distributed ownership. This is the 20% rule, where insiders, affiliates, related persons do not beneficially own 20% of total token supply in aggregate. Now, this is where it gets interesting, because that's the 20% rule. But what we look at right here is for pre-existing blockchains, they have a lighter path to be deemed mature. This is where we go to paragraph 3. And we have these three notes right here. The blockchain system was created prior to the date of enactment of the relevant section. It met the key non-ownership criteria from prior to January 1st, 2020. So basically, you need to meet all of those sections in paragraph 2 before 2020, except for pre-existing systems. They have a different rule where you have at least 50% of the units of the related digital commodity are held by persons other than the issuer, related persons, or affiliated persons. So it's a less strict threshold than the general 20% inside ownership cap for new blockchains that haven't been established already. So what I did is I had Grok then spit out, okay, what would the XRP ledger, what would need to happen for XRP here? If this is passed as written, what would need to happen? Well, for XRP, this was launched in 2012, and it easily meets the created before enactment criteria. Decentralization, check. Ownership distribution. Ripple holds a significant portion in escrow release schedules, but analysts vary on the exact 20% or 50% pre-existing threshold. And this is what we're going to dive in a little bit deeper. So for projects like Ripple and XRP, you file a certification with the SEC detailing operations, governance, ownership, distribution, code, transaction history, etc. Provide evidence against common control. And then if using the pre-existing path, emphasize pre-2020 decentralization plus current non-insider holdings, and then the filing becomes effective after 60 days unless the SEC objects. Now, here's the thing though. This is a pre-existing safe harbor option for Ripple, and this is where they wouldn't need to be under that 20% distributed ownership rule. Now, for this pre-existing one, right, we're talking at least 50% of the units of the digital commodity are held by persons other than the issuer, related persons, or affiliated persons. Now, this is where the rulemaking process is going to come from the SEC and the CFTC, right? And so to get us to the timeline, right, of how this could play out, we'll talk about that. But one final point. As this is written, Ripple would need to get their holdings below 50%, which they've already done. And that, I think, would even include if you have affiliated persons like Chris Larson, Brad Garlinghouse, David Schwartz, right? We would need to see the rulemaking process for what's considered an affiliated person or insiders, right? But I believe that as it stands right now, Ripple and their affiliated persons and executives would be under the 50% distribution. So we would check off that box. And the question that I ask myself, and I ask you guys in the comments down below, would Ripple just opt to go for the 20% distribution? Because from my conversations with people at Ripple, people around Ripple, everything that I've read and gathered in my research tells me that they do want to get their number, their holdings, down below that 20% number, and that's where they would stop selling XRP, right at about that 20% number. But as this is written, it looks like they would only need to get their holdings below 50%, which they've already done. But if the SEC or CFTC in the rulemaking process, or if this, text gets changed before the bill gets signed into law, then that part of the, story here could change. But as far as the timeline, right? How long, let's say Ripple did need to get below 20%, how long would they have? So if we run with the assumption that the bill gets signed into law by the end of August or the August recess, okay, this begins the full rulemaking process, and we're looking at 12 to 18 months, okay? So the rulemaking deadline is about 1 year or 360 days. So the CFTC and SEC must adopt rules via notice and comment period within 1 year. Now, they also have 60 days after the final rule is published into the Federal Register. Now, if you go back and you look at like the Dodd-Frank back in 2011 after the Great Financial Crisis, it took 2 to 4 years for the complete law to be enacted, the rulemaking process to be done, the comment period to be done. It took 2 to 4 years. Now, the expectation is that this one's going to be moving a lot faster. I mean, just look at our SEC, look at our CFTC. They're already given guidance on a lot of this. And of course, we already won the SEC versus Ripple lawsuit. We already know that XRP is not a security as a matter of law. We don't need the Clarity Act to know this. But what I'm watching for, because I think this is one of, if not the biggest catalyst to drive XRP to higher prices, is the supply variable. Right? How much supply is actually going to be out here? How much float is going to be available for people to buy of XRP? Right? This is the biggest variable to watch. And if they have to get it below the 20% number, they will still have about, 12 to 18 months to get that done, which is so interesting because when you look at how much XRP Ripple holds, it's about 38 to 40 billion XRP. And this is as of April 30th, 2026. You've had a couple escrow releases since then. But if you look, on-chain data shows 32.75 billion currently in escrow overall. So this is the big number because the escrow is what they can't touch or control until it gets released programmatically at the first of the month. Then they get another billion XRP out of the escrow. And for the past couple of years, they've been returning 700 million. They keep 300 million. And that 700 million goes and gets locked up again for another 32 months, right? Because only a billion comes out every month. And so, at the current rate of keeping and releasing 300 million, we wouldn't get below that 20% number in 12 months. But if we started to, distribute 1 billion XRP every month, that would get them from 32 billion down to that 20 billion number in about 12 months. Right? So if Ripple has to, or if they decide to get those holdings down below that 20% number, we're about 12 to 18 months out from that distribution plan being completed. Now, before you think that this is going to dump the price of XRP, please understand that all of Ripple's sales of XRP are happening over the counter, not on public retail exchanges, not in the same markets, not on the same order book that me and you are using, unless you're an institutional investor that's watching the show right now. Right? All of Ripple sales are OTC, which don't impact the price of XRP negatively. They're not pushing the price down. The sales aren't hitting the open order books. And so, if Ripple does have to distribute that 12 to 15 billion XRP, it'll all be done OTC. It'll all go directly to bank and institutional partners, and it will not push the price of XRP down at all. And that's an important note to make. And so I'm waiting to see what the final version, what the final text of this bill ends up looking like. But we're on schedule where if Ripple did need to get below 20%, or if they wanted to get down to 20%, they could accelerate this distribution plan, and they would be able to do so without impacting XRP negatively. And this ultimately, would complete the first catalyst of Ripple's distribution plan for XRP. But then it gets us to the second catalyst, which is Ripple announcing publicly that they're done selling XRP. And those are the two big catalysts I think that take us to having a realistic conversation, taking it past just a meme and a talking point and a narrative, but for the supply shock story to actually become reality, which is folks realize, oh, wait, this, little coin XRP here that we thought there was all this 100 billion supply. We're going to have supply forever. Ripple's going to be selling forever. That's over. What's out here in the secondary market is what us peasants have available to us. All the rest of the supply gets kept for institutions and banks. This fundamentally changes the whole story for XRP. And it fills in the gap and it answers the question for so many people, which is they don't trust Ripple. They don't have faith in Ripple, and they believe that Ripple is going to, basically shoot themselves in the foot by keeping XRP suppressed forever, which makes no sense, right? Ripple's incentive is to see XRP's price go up to drive value and utility to XRP in order to do so, right? They don't want to pump and dump XRP. That's not going to be good. But I believe that they have a long drawn-out plan here to distribute XRP, make it a world reserve currency by distributing it to banks and institutions, but also allowing us retail Joe Blow to get our little bag of XRP too. That's how you create a real reserve currency. And this is a plan that started in 2012. I think that it, gets completed here over the next 12 to 18 months. And everybody outside of the XRP community is not even aware of this. It's not even on their radar. They're not reading this section of the Clarity Act. They have no idea about this, and it's going to hit them. It's going to smack them in the face in the form of XRP price appreciation. It's going to be dramatic. It's going to be violent. Now, like I said, there's a couple caveats here, right? If Ripple doesn't have to get down to 20%, if they just have to get below 50%, then they could continue distributing XRP at the current rate that they are, and we wouldn't be looking at the supply shock scenario hitting in the next 12 to 18 months based off of this. The supply shock could come from other catalysts, but this is a catalyst that I'm watching. We have to watch closely to see the final version of the Clarity Act text. How does it get done? And then the rulemaking process from the SEC and the CFTC. If they force this issue and they say everybody needs to get below that 20% number, we know what path Ripple has to take. And I believe it leads to that real XRP supply shock. But you guys let me know in the comments down below. If you appreciate our content, please help us out by liking this video, sharing it out far and wide. And if you want to support us further, we have community resources down below. That's another great way to support the cause. And then we also have our sponsor, iTrust Capital, available for you guys as well. They have the trifecta with the IRA for your retirement funds, the premium custody account for just simple trading and institutional custody. And then we love this new one they rolled out too, the treasury accounts for your business, your trust, your LLC, your nonprofit. You can start holding digital assets in a secure and compliant solution right away. We love this option. And once again, all of their solutions, free institutional grade custody. So use my link down below, get your account funded, and get that $100 funding bonus, and keep those digital assets secure while we wait for the supply shock to play out. God bless all of you guys. We'll see you in the next one. Take care. I am your host, Zach Rector. I really appreciate all of the love and support. If you want to support the channel, just remember that you can start by smashing that thumbs up for me, sharing this content far and wide, and everything else is at my website.